Hi, welcome to this episode of The Daily. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, a couple of weeks ago, The Force Awakens, episode 7 of the Star Wars franchise was released on Blu-ray. I got myself a copy and I watched it with the kids one Saturday afternoon. And watching it again, I saw it a couple of times at the cinema. I really enjoyed it when I went and watched it at the cinema. I really did buy into the hype, to be fair, and I was really... I was salivating at the bit to see the film. The film came out, I went and watched it, and I was just like, this is amazing. And looking back at it now, they're watching it on Blu-ray, I can kind of see that it's perhaps not quite as good as the hype led us all to believe that it really is. It's still a good film, it's still an enjoyable film, but interestingly, I actually think The Force Awakens probably benefited a lot from something I like to call the Phantom Menace effect. Go back and watch my previous episode about the Phantom Menace effect if you want to hear me talking more about this. But basically it's this idea that the Phantom Menace was so bad that we sort of compare subsequent Star Wars movies to that film and we go, well, it's not as bad as the Phantom Menace, so it must be a good film. And when in actual fact, that's not what makes something a good film. It could still be a really terrible film, but because The Phantom Menace was so bad, we sort of use that as our yardstick. And I look at The Force Awakens and I think, yeah, it was a good, enjoyable sort of Star Wars flick, but to be honest with you, it really does sort of hang in the balance a little bit at the moment. And it all depends on what happens with the next film in that new Star Wars trilogy. If the next film carries on just imitating beats from the original trilogy, there's going to be a problem, I think, and a lot of people, a lot of fans are going to go, oh, okay, this is not actually that good. If it really uses The Force Awakens as a jumping off point and actually starts building a really solid narrative and some good character development and some good story development, then I think people are going to go, okay, this is great. And I sort of see now that The Force Awakens was sort of this, almost like a necessary evil. You have to sort of set up the world and reboot it basically after what happened with the prequels. And so they'll sort of, if you like, they'll forgive some of those things that you can look past. I'll give you an example of something that's really glaring to me now, going back and watching the film again, that I think is a classic example of where good movie making went out the window a little bit. At the end of the film, we see Rey. By the way, spoiler alerts if you haven't seen the movie. Rey gets in the Millennium Falcon with Chewie and she flies off to find Luke, and the movie ends with her standing on that island handing the lightsaber back to Luke, who's obviously a lot older now and standing there in his Jedi wizard robes and all alone living the solitary life, and he's got this sort of sad look on his face and she's got this look of anticipation, and the movie ends literally with her holding the lightsaber out to Luke. That really was not good movie making when you stop and think about it and actually think objectively about that film. That movie had a really perfect point. There was a really perfect beat on which that movie should have ended. And it was when they all got back to the base and they'd hugged and done all that sort of stuff, where it should have ended when Rey got into the Millennium Falcon with Chewie, and you know you've made it when people are calling you the. So she got in the Millennium Falcon with Chewie and flew off. And that would have been a really good natural ending from a filmmaking perspective. It would have left anticipation, it would have left all these sort of big open questions about what was coming, what was going to happen, what was she going to find, was she even going to find him? It would have left so much scope, and it was a natural place to end that film, but they didn't. They did what is commonly referred to as fan service. We've got to put Luke Skywalker in there somewhere. So they should have shoehorned him in at the end with that final couple of minutes where there's no dialogue. She simply turns up on the island and hands him the lightsaber. Now that scene completely changes the whole dynamic of what's coming next. We actually now know a big chunk about what's going to happen in their next film. They've already given us effectively the introduction or the beginning of the next movie. And so from a filmmaking perspective, that wasn't a good example of how to do filmmaking well. So I think there's moments of that throughout The Force Awakens, and when you look at it now without all the hype and when you sort of move away from the hype, it's still a good film, don't get me wrong. It is nowhere near the disaster and the mess that were the prequel films. It's a good and enjoyable film, but there are some big question marks, and I think how those question marks get resolved by the audience, whether the audience forgives them or not, is going to depend largely on what happens next with the next movie in that trilogy. If the next movie is good, and it really builds and takes things in a new direction and really does build something dynamic and exciting, we're going to look past those things. But if it just starts rehashing things from Empire Strikes Back and it just starts repeating the same old tropes again, I think the franchise is not going to be in a good place. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily.